Welcome to episode number 161 of the Marine Layer podcast. We welcome on retired big leaguer Steven Souza Jr. We chat about the Mariners' hitting struggles, some great stories from his career, and the role of being a veteran player in a big league clubhouse. We'll also react to the Mariners deciding to retain Jerry Dipoto for 2025.
This show's brought to you by our friends over at Pagotch's Pub 85. Guys, football's back, and the MLB season's is starting to wind down. So that means, well, playoff baseball's coming up. And with that, with football, with the NBA and hockey just on the brink of starting in about a month, it's the best time of the sports calendar. October's the best month of the sports year, and September's not too far behind. So what a great time to get out, have some awesome drinks, have some great food, spend some time with your friends, and watch a bunch of games. You can do all of that along with great happy hour deals, $3 and $4 drinks from 2 to 6 p.m. on Monday through Friday, over at Pagotch's Pub 85 in Kirkland. And your reminder, the best thing you guys can do to support us is subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. If you're watching on the video side, like the video, drop a comment, hit that subscribe button. You guys see it. If you're listening, download, rate and review 5 stars, and then follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube Shorts, at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive deep to right field, down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go, left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio. Oh, baby, what a moment. Tie ball game is 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network. Recording on Thursday evening, September 5th. The Seattle Times broke earlier this evening that Jerry Dipoto would be retained by the Mariners ownership group into 2025 and potentially beyond. There's a lot of details to get into this, so let's get into it. Let's start with looking at the reason why Jerry Dipoto got retained to 2025. I have the reason why Jerry Dipoto got retained for 2025. Because he fits what the Mariners ownership likes to do. And that's what matters to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they decided how Jerry Dipoto builds big league rosters to be competitive, to win games in the high 80s, potentially into the low 90s. That is what they want looking forward to next year. And given what they anticipate is coming this offseason, they feel like Jerry Dipoto is the man to handle that offseason again. As we anticipate, it's going to look a lot like last offseason was. Instead of hiring someone new to handle that offseason, why not just let Jerry do it again, given that he might be expecting what's going to happen in the offseason again? Because Jerry's not stupid. He is very smart. If Jerry looks at this offseason, let's be honest, Lyle, do you think Jerry looks at this offseason and is like, man, we're going to get a huge budget raise this offseason. We're going to have a ton of money to spend. You think he's thinking that?
No, I think internally he's thinking to himself, this offseason's going to fucking suck. It might be even worse than last year's.
Right. But he's already been through it once.
Mm-hmm.
Without well, let's say the beginning of the offseason from a PR perspective was an absolute travesty and a disaster with his press conference. But this offseason, since he's already been through the ringer once on a tight budget offseason, it's like, why not? Why not have him do it again?
Right. And that's kind of what I was getting at by saying this offseason is going to suck, because it does not seem like there's going to be money coming from the Mariners ownership to give this team a bump in payroll. It just doesn't. Like, from everything that seems to be gathered by the masses, we don't know if Root Sports is going to be back in 2025. And if it is, they can't be netting much money for it. So as an example, not as an example, as a reality, Jerry Dipoto is probably going to get told, if you want to spend money, you're going to have to create it yourself, which is bullshit, and it's stupid, and it's not like these teams don't have money. Jeff Passan talks about it all the time when he's on 710. It's like, these owners have money. I don't care that the RSN's falling apart. They could spend it if they wanted to spend it, but they're not going to. And that's why I say this offseason could be worse, because they're pressed up against the payroll budget and are either going to have to cut ties with guys on the roster or just essentially run back this roster as it is, which we already know has a laundry list of problems.
what this move with Jerry Dipoto signals is that the Mariners will not be all in to win a division title and win a World Series next year. I feel like that was a given, but this, I would say, confirms it.
When are they ever all in on winning a division and World Series title?
That's the point.
Yeah, they're never all in on winning a division and a World Series title.
Yeah. Again, that's the point. And if Jerry was going to do it with the budget they were given, he would have done it already. In 9 seasons, he would have won a division title.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that's pretty clear coming up with this. What was troubling with this, for me, really, was if you look at the Seattle Times report, they note that by mid-season, Mariners ownership had already made a decision that they were going to keep Jerry Dipoto for 2025. Let's say it is sometime around the 4th of July. Let's say that. That was in the middle of the summer, right? So they had made the decision that Jerry's job was safe at that point. So then why does Scott only get a month of hang time? Scott got essentially a bad month and change that led to his firing.
I'll tell you why. There's this thing in sports and often in life called scapegoating. Scott's service is what we call a scapegoat. Somebody had to take the blame, even though it was basically not his fault, almost at all. He was forced to be the scapegoat and take the blame. There's your answer.
Mm-hmm. Just strange. But on brand. If you just listen to our Ryan Divish episode, he laid it out perfectly. They don't operate in common sense.
No.
If they operated in common sense, Jerry Dipoto probably wouldn't be the president of baseball operations next year. But he is.
Yeah, they would go outside the organization and try to find somebody that's up and coming, that's revered, that they think is ready to be a full big league GM and improve this team. Now, what would you look for in a potential new GM if Dipoto wasn't back that could improve a new team? I would say the one thing that could be upgraded over Jerry. Well, okay, I'll say 2 things. One's on field, and it's better evaluation of major league offense, and also just being better at PR. Other than that, I don't really know what upgrades you make over Dipoto.
Do you know what's the problem, though, with this offseason? What's the 2 things the Mariners need the most this offseason? Good PR and major league talent evaluation.
Well, I can't help you there, Haas.
Ugh. What do you look for? I'd love to say a sitting general manager, but you know that's never going to happen.
No.
You want someone with a lot of experience. You would be picking out someone with significantly less experience than what you currently have in your front office if you were to go outside of your organization.
And that's what I mean. I less mean who it would be and more the qualities you look for, which, again, I think the 2 things which Jerry has lacked is good PR and finding major league offensive talent. Those are the 2 things you could look at. He's drafted well. He's developed. They've got a good farm system. They've got an elite rotation. Aside from this year, they have developed elite bullpens with guys that are totally inexpensive and they find value in. The one on-field area, offense at the big leagues, and the one off-field area, PR. So if you were to look to upgrade over Jerry, it would be those things. But they're not. I mean, obviously they're not going to look because he's got a new deal.
And if you were to bring in a new regime, you would be looking, I feel like, beyond 2025. If you were, sorry, let me reframe that. Sorry. So if you were to bring in a new regime, what you're paying attention to and what you're focused on would be on 2025, but you would also be anticipating moves in the future beyond that, 2026, 2027, 2028, etc. But as we've repeated multiple times, I'm to the point where I don't really care about what the future looks like because we've been sold on future for so long, and we just literally just been waiting for a year where it's, actually about the team currently on the field at that time. So if you were thinking, Lyle, what would Jerry do to improve a 2025 roster versus what would a new regime do to improve a 2025 roster? How much different would it be? Like, if you brought a new regime in, would they decide, even though we need to create budget, we wouldn't trade Randy Arozarena? His feelings don't change. He doesn't care about a new regime. He's just there to play.
Right.
That wouldn't change. If a new regime came in, would the reality of the Mariners have a significant amount of pitching and not enough hitting change, and that they could very realistically trade a pitcher for a hitter? No. All that would be the same. You could bring in a new regime, and they could still trade Logan Gilbert in the offseason, and they could still trade Randy Arozarena. That part's not going to change. They're not magically going to stay because of that.
Which gets back to the root of the whole problem. And as they say in the second Hunger Games movie, Catching Fire, remember who the real enemy is, and end quote. It's true. Like, Jerry's not perfect. We know that. But you think Jerry's top priority in free agency this past winter was signing Mitch Garver? No. I'm sure he would have loved to sign Mitch Garver at the time as a complimentary piece. You think Jerry didn't want Shohei? He clearly wanted him the first time. You think that wavered after what he did for 6 years in Anaheim? No. If he'd had the budget, I'm sure they would have gone after him. They don't. And that's the extreme example. They don't have the budget to sign anybody. I mean, they have the money. They just don't. This ownership group doesn't give the front office the necessary resources, which is what's going to drive people crazy. And I'll be honest, if they have another offseason like we're expecting to see them have, where almost no money is spent because of the alleged RSN problems, dude, I think they're going to start to lose some people. I really do. And that hurts me to say. I want nothing but good things for this franchise. That's what every fan wants. They just want to see this team be great and the stands packed for all good reasons and to root on a team that's exciting and fun and can get to a World Series. But I don't know if that's going to happen. And for so long, people were sold on this rebuild, sold on this core. Stick with it while this core formulates, and when the time's right, we're going to go outside the org, we're going to invest the necessary resources, we're going to do the necessary things to put this team over the top. Well, the core's here, and they might not win 81 games this year. They may finish under 500. And if that's paired with another bad offseason, the nostalgia of the rebuild is going to start to wane on people. I hope that's not the case. I hope I'm wrong. But that's just what reality's starting to feel like. You can tell, you can start to tell people are getting on the edge here.
Didn't we say that last offseason, though, that they were going to lose fans? We did say that.
Yeah, but
and
that was
really lost anybody.
That was after what was still an 88-win season. They were just on the brink of missing the playoffs. Again, we're talking finishing under 500. It would be essentially year 4 with this core. If you want to count like the Julio Kirby Cal time, it'd be 3 years with this core, which would feature one playoff appearance 2 years ago, consecutive years of not making the playoffs, a year of finishing under 500, and then not investing resources again.
I think that I'd be curious to see what the numbers would be to really represent losing fans. I have no doubt people will be pissed, and there'd be a lot of people who would stop watching. But how many? Because as I remind you over and over and over again, there are so many just very casual Mariners fans and baseball fans in the Pacific Northwest who probably think of all this as a non-issue and it doesn't matter. Like, really, it does. And as we know, that's really who the Mariners appeal to. A lot of fireworks nights, a lot of really good marketing campaigns by the marketing team. Seriously, they do a fantastic job getting people into the ballpark with really good weather and a competitive, throw fun out, not always fun, but young and competitive product on the field. All those things are true, right?
They are. And I'm not laughing at what you said about the marketing team being incredible, because they are. That's what drives me crazy, is top to bottom, it really feels like this whole organization is so committed to winning, minus the people in charge. So, that's what drives me crazy. You're absolutely right. The people in marketing and PR and, media relations and you name it, ballpark operations, they are fantastic at their jobs. The marketing team for the Mariners is awesome. That's not what I was laughing at. What I'm laughing at is I can't hear you or anybody say fireworks nights with the Mariners without associating it with Mark from Maple Valley. We're treated with fireworks and bobbleheads. So when you say that, that's all that rings in my head is that call.
That's fair. That is fair. I had one thing that slipped my mind here. Do you have any other points here? I'm going to try and rekindle whatever I was thinking about.
Okay. I mean, I can try and help you out as we're just sitting right here. Is it something about non-baseball? Is it something about ownership? Is it something about the front office? Is it something about the roster? Still nothing? Well, I will say this. Again, you know what Jerry Dipoto is going to be. He drafts well, develops pitching, farm system's good, but you know there are limitations. There's going to be payroll limitations no matter what. He has not developed enough offensive talent at the major league level, and we're going to have to see what he does. Yeah, okay, now it looks like you figured it out.
Well, I got it back. I will not be endorsing any sort of message coming from the Mariners from the time the season ends through next season where they say, well, wait until our young guys come up.
Yeah, no.
That's not allowed. Because you know what the reaction is going to be, Lyle? The reaction is going to be this.
We're sitting here again talking about the same things.
Thank you, Brian Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Because guess what? When they say that, the premier prospects are not going to be up next year. Now, we might see Cole Young and Harry Ford, and that's no knock on them. We like both of those dudes. They're really good dudes. We talked to them in spring training, and we know they have some upside. But they also didn't have, set the world on fire type seasons in Double-A. As Ryan Divish said, could Cole Young be a 18, 20 home run guy, 790 to 800 OPS? Sure, at some point. I don't know if at 22 years old in the big leagues that's what he's going to be doing. And you'd be banking on him to help you do that if that message is relayed saying wait till the young guys come up, because that's who's coming up next year. If you're talking about the premier prospects, the three we always highlight in terms of the highlight bats, Colt Emerson, Valentin Celestine, Lazaro Montes. Minimum 2026 is when that's going to happen. And I don't know if it's at the start of 2026. So you'd be asking people to wait another year and a half to see your premier prospects come up in a time where they might not just click right away. Julio didn't. Kelnick didn't.
And when are they going to be good? When are all those players going to be collectively good together? 2028?
Maybe 2027, depending on how fast they develop. Yeah, exactly.
Well, based on what the org has shown us with hitting development, that's no guarantee. It takes only a year.
Right? No, it's true. And I want those guys to come up and be great. Like I just went down to Everett on Wednesday and talked to Colt, talked to Michael Arroyo, a couple other guys. They're great, and we're rooting for him. Colt Emerson's an awesome dude. I'm rooting for him to be great. He's very very nice, but very focused. You can tell he's really, really mature for a 19-year-old kid. And he made an awesome play while I was there too. By the way, it was that play he ranged to his left in the hole and made the spin throw. Yeah, there's reasons to be excited about those guys. But guess what? When they're up and they're ready, have an actual lineup around them so all the pressure's not on them, because that's not fair. Look at what it did to Kelnick. Don't do that again.
So let's say the Mariners, let's create a fantasy world. Mm-hmm. Ready? Let's say the Mariners do operate like they want to win a championship. And they have to make this decision on Jerry Dipoto to attempt to win a championship in the next couple of years and make deep runs into the playoffs. Based on what he has done, would you have kept him around for next season?
Under the assumption that they would not bring in anybody better, yes.
But I created a fantasy world where Mariners ownership wants to win a championship next year and is willing, let me clarify, and is willing to put the resources into it too.
So you're saying they could...
Let's swap the Phillies ownership and the Mariners ownership right now in this fantasy world. And they are moving into next season.
Well, then I'd be curious to see what Dipoto could do with an actual payroll. Because, again, he's been hamstrung his whole time here. So it's kind of an unfair question. Or, maybe unfair is not the right word. It's a tough question. Because we've only seen Jerry operate on a minimal budget. I would be very interested to see what he does with no handcuffs. Just free reins. Do what you need to do. Under the Phillies ownership. Under Steve Cohen, etc. That's my answer to that question.
Yes, then.
Sure, because we don't know.
Okay.
But if he was here next year and the year after, and he had free reign to go do what he wanted in free agency with no limitations, and they still weren't making deep postseason runs, then yeah, I'd look to go find somebody else. And if we're still living in a fantasy world, then you look to poach somebody away from another team that's already a really good GM.
Yeah.
That's what you do. Or like, here's an example too, right? There seems to be some speculation, I saw it out there today on Twitter, that Farhan Zaidi might not be back with the Giants next year. But do we know if Farhan Zaidi is for sure better than Jerry? Because he had a crazy payroll when he was part of the Dodgers organization. Then he goes to the Giants. He had the payroll with the Giants, considering they almost gave Correa a huge contract. They almost gave Judge a huge contract. They just extended Matt Chapman. They gave
Blake Snell.
Blake Snell. Yeah. So he did all that with a payroll, and the Giants aren't making deep postseason runs. So if he's doing that with a payroll.
They'd won.
When?
21.
Oh, okay. Well, no, but they lost in the first round that year.
Well, sorry, not a deep run, but they were really good. They won 108 games.
Well, yeah. Okay, yeah. That with a roster that was not going to sustain that year over year. That was a fluke.
People would kill for that.
Well, okay, yeah.
Right
but here's my point. Here's my point. Like, is Farhan Zaidi a for sure better option than Jerry Dipoto?
He's not. No.
So that's the one guy that's a name on the market right now, potentially. And if it's not him, then who would it be? Again, if you had all the money in the world to poach Andrew Friedman away from LA, great. But that's not going to happen.
So, yeah, Farhan would be the only one with recent GM experience.
Otherwise,
running a baseball ops department.
Yeah, or unless you get Eric Neander from Tampa and way overpay to get him away. That type of thing.
But everything we know, the Mariners aren't going to pay as... The Rays might pay Neander more than Jerry makes.
Right.
We don't know that, but everything we can hear of what the compensation like is what Mariners pay out. Could be pretty close.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you move 3,000 miles for similar pay?
Yeah.
So my answer to that question is, in a fantasy land, I would not keep Jerry if that was the case, based off what he has done. Unfortunately, we don't live in a fantasy land. We live in reality. And I think going into next season, this is your only option, really. And let me make this clear. Like I stated earlier, I'm not looking at how Jerry builds the Mariners for the future. I'm looking at how Jerry builds the 2025 Mariners. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's how ownership is looking at this as well. How does Jerry build the 2025 Mariners team? I don't care what the team looks like in 2028. No more sustainability. Again, we're just kind of done with sustainability, because the only thing the Mariners have sustainably been is slightly above average. So focus on the 2025 Mariners. That's what Jerry Dipoto's job is going to be. And if we're in the same situation a year from now, I will be much harder, much more in the let's find somebody else train. Right?
Sure.
Because then we would have another year of the same product.
Right. But he's going to have to make the 2025 roster better with two hands tied behind his back and basically nothing to work with, as we assume.
But again, the way we know his contract was structured, he didn't have to come back.
No.
I don't think.
But he might feel like he wasn't going to for sure find another president of baseball ops job somewhere else. He might have found a GM job, but president of baseball ops is an upgrade. So
yep, probably not. So again, that's his choice right there, of decision what to do.
Yeah, so he's going to stick with it, but we don't think he's going to have much of a budget. You know what? Prove us wrong, ownership. You think you don't like people saying they're not going to have much of a budget? Well, you can change that. You own the team. You get to make the decision. Prove us wrong. Prove us
Be
wrong.
Nice. Just go sign Juan Soto.
Oh, I'm down. No value beers.
Nope.
No value beers.
Full price, $18 a pop every game next year.
Mm-hmm. What was the last thing I was going to say here? Did I have one more thought on this? See, now I'm losing my train of thoughts because we've got our head spinning here. There's just a lot going on with this.
Yeah, I just the thing about the Mariners deciding midseason to keep Jerry and then giving Scott the short end of the stick just rubs me the wrong way, man.
Yeah,
it just doesn't. Just more on par with the bad PR we see over and over and over again of that. Just feels a little short-sighted in that point. I will also say this was more predictable once Dan Wilson was hired as a full-time manager.
Right.
Ryan Divish, when he was on with us, said, no, that's not for sure. But just given the optics of it, seemed like with a full-time tag, you're not going to, again, uproot a regime at that point.
And by for sure, you mean it's not for sure Jerry's going to be here, but it seems likely. Because just in case people heard that and said, what, it's not for sure Dan Wilson's going to be full-time. No, at that point, Dan Wilson was full-time.
Was full-time, but Divish was saying there's nothing stopping you from just letting him go again.
Right.
If you fire Jerry.
Sure. No, that's true. And I will wrap up with this. The guy we were speculating about on the last show as a potential new GM, well, at least it's not that guy, people. So if you're mad about Jerry, there's your glass half full perspective.
Well, what's the difference in a win total with Tim Stanton running things versus Jerry Dipoto in 2025?
In 2025, it might be absolutely nothing at all. Right. In 2030, and even in 2027, 2028, if he is proven, if he had hypothetically been proven to not be good at the job, it would have been a problem because Jerry clearly didn't have total job security until it was made informed to him that they were going to keep him. But again, it would have been the Cowboys of the NFL if that had happened.
Yeah.
Or sorry, the Cowboys of the MLB. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have. And what do you think the approval rating on this decision is, if you're going to guess?
On the hypothetical or on Jerry?
On Jerry's decision.
Oh.
On the decision to keep Jerry.
It's never a good thing to just judge off social media, but I'd honestly say it's close to 50-50.
I'd agree with you.
Yeah. It's pretty split. That's what we were saying at the beginning of the show. It is legitimately pretty split between the fan base. People have their different opinions. Now, had the hypothetical come true, I kid you not, 0%. That's not an exaggeration. Could you have found one person that didn't have bloodlines say, or that wasn't good friends with them being like, this is a great idea?
Other people probably somebody in the ownership group would agree.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Nobody with bloodlines, no close friends, no coworkers.
Everyone in the Houston Astros organization.
Or the A's, because maybe they feel like some of the bad PR would have gotten taken off them.
It would.
Yeah, that would have been
There's
bad.
nothing John Fisher likes more than someone else's business to cover up his own.
All right, well, that's where we're at, people. Jerry's going to be here in 2025. All we can hope now is that he does the absolute best he can to put a winning roster on the field, because that's all we can root for. He is in charge of making this team better, so we have to root for him to do so, and I will be.
We didn't get to talk about this with Steven Souza Jr. I would have been interested to know his thoughts on this, but we did dive into more of a philosophical hitting approach conversation with Steven Souza Jr. If you remember, Steven Souza was a Mariner for 6 games. It was 6, right? That's it? 2021?
You?
Yeah, I think it was 6. It was less than 10 games. Not very long. So he has a very brief Mariners career, but he grew up a Mariner fan. He grew up in Everett. He went to Cascade High School. He's got a lot of really fun stories in his career. And he's also got, a lot of just breaking down hitting and how he dealt with different hitting coaches and approaches and how it related to the struggles the Mariners are currently going through, I thought was very insightful. So I want you guys, when you listen to this, to pay attention to that, because Steven, he was really awesome and gave us some really detailed answers.
Oh, this is a great interview. He really breaks it down from the hitting perspective. He breaks a lot of stuff down, and he also shares some really cool stories from his career, both when he was with Seattle, when he wasn't with Seattle, etc. But yeah, I was pretty blown away from having this conversation. I was like, that is a smart dude who really knows baseball, or specifically really knows hitting. So we hope you guys enjoy this one.
So let's get you now to that conversation with Steven Souza Jr.
All right, we welcome on retired big leaguer, former Mariner, and current KJR analyst, Steven Souza Jr. on with us. Steven, thanks so much for taking some time to join us. There's so many questions that when we look at what the Mariners currently are this season that have been floating around of why they haven't hit this season, the batter's eye comes up a lot. So I want to ask you, as a hitter and someone who has hit at T-Mobile Park, when you step into that batter's box and look out to center field, I want you to tell us what you saw and why something like that could not help a hitter and why people are rightfully complaining about it this season?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When you obviously have a team that has offensive struggles, you're going to try and find any solution, any answer that you can. And I think they're running out of them, right? And if you think about the batter's eye there being kind of an obscure thought, it's kind of like a last resort, like what's happening here in the ballpark environment that's not contributing to offensive success. If I think back to my time when I'd step in there, it's like nothing really stood out where I'm like, oh man, that's really drastic. And there are some places around the league where you're like, that can kind of throw you off a little bit. In Tampa it was tough a little bit because there's some lighting around on the side that can kind of put some glare on the ball, and it takes a second to get used to. But, I think the one thing when I felt like when I was at T-Mobile Park was like, you stepped in the box and it felt like the fences were probably 50 feet farther back than they were, right? And there were some balls that I would get and I was like, man, that ball should be out of here, or at least like driven in the gap, and they just kind of hang a little bit, and people run them down. We see Julio run them down in the gap all the time. It's like an extra layer up there, a marine layer, if you will, that just kind of keeps the ball up in a long time. I never had the luxury of playing there in July or August where it kind of dissipates. It was always in May or, the beginning of June where that marine layer was still very visible. And so, I don't know about the batter's eye. You can definitely, when you're kind of in the dugout, you can see it's at like a strange angle, which most batters' eyes aren't at that kind of like 45-degree angle, which I don't know if it's that drastic, but they're mostly straight on. And I know they tried to put like some type of film on it that like some NASA film that kind of got rid of the glare. But there is, during the day, there is a little bit of a glare off the left side, especially when you have a left-hander that you can see. It gets a little bit tough. So, I know that originally they had trees back there, right? And they kept dying or something like that. But I think if they just made it straight up, it would solve a lot of, what we've heard of some of these visual problems going forward.
Does it do anything for the depth, especially for a right-handed hitter? Because for righties, it's farther back than it is for lefties. Does it benefit being closer to you as opposed to farther away?
The batter's eye?
Yeah, the angle of it.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. They're really only one of the few ones that I can think of, if not the only one, that has the batter's eye like that angle. So it's hard to compare because nobody else has the other side far away. I just know that when, you think about like one of the best batter's eyes is Oakland, right? It's like you see the ball really well there. It's straight on. Everything's green in the background and black. And there's a very good distinction between the ball and the background. And even when there's kind of a glare there in Oakland, you still have a better shot there because of how, equal the back is. And that's what you want. You don't want like a depth perception issue at the plate, especially in today's game, right? These guys are really good on the mound. And if there's a part of you that's like has some depth perception with the batter's eye, that's a very big uphill battle.
So it never looked slanted to you when you were hitting? Like every hitter's different, right? Like everybody's going to have a little bit of a different perception. But like part of the reason this has come up so much this year is Teoscar Hernandez has publicly talked about now. Yeah, it was weird for me to hit there, he would say. He said it felt slanted. I felt just like off, like I couldn't get the depth perception right. But to you at least, you didn't have that issue?
I think when you're playing, at least when I was playing, I tried to eliminate those issues of like, hey, even if that was true, I was just like, I'm just going to not even think about it, because the more I kind of ruminated on it, it would take me away from what I was actually trying to do and put me at a disadvantage. But I think stepping back and looking at it, yeah, it's easy to see that there's something off there, right? And, you as baseball players, like when I was in the moment, I was terrible here. Like I would come in here, and I remember I had like some stretches where I came from Texas when I hit 5 hits in a game and a homer in every game, and this was our next series, and I was hot every time I was coming here, and it would cool me off coming here every single time because, like you said, something was just off here, and he's explaining it from his perspective that it was a batter's eye, and from me it was like I felt like I had to swing as hard as I could to get something out of here. But it definitely, whatever, way you want to spin it, whether it's just the size of the park or the batter's eye, the angle, there is something at T-Mobile Park that makes you want to come out of yourself and do more than you do in other stadiums. And anytime you get that kind of mental state in the box, that's a recipe for disaster.
Is that what you feel like this current team has been doing much of this season, pressing a little bit too hard and almost making it a contagious effect with everyone else?
I'd be hard-pressed to blame it just on the batter's eye. To say it's not a contributor, I don't think you can fully erase that. But, these guys have really struggled from beginning to end offensively. Like, there's really been no answer here. And, they eliminated two of the most productive players from an offense last year in Gino Suarez and Teoscar Hernandez to eliminate strikeouts. And I think that's great. That's a great ideology to say, hey, we're going to move the ball forward more so we can create some action. We have too much stagnant outs. But when you take away, and I said this in the winter, when you take away 200 RBIs of production, like that is a monster to replace. And so I think you're asking, back to your question, I think you're asking guys to step into roles that they haven't really done their whole life, right? Or haven't been consistently good at, like those two have been their whole career. And when you do that, it goes back to the adage, is like when anytime you try and do more than you can, it ends up being pretty bad, right? And you add on top of it, the guy that's the best player on the team having his, worst year so far, that's just, it's not going to be productive on the field. And so, I think you look at that lineup and, when you had LA and the Mariners kind of going side by side in the lineup and you're like, there's just nobody that you would take other than probably Julio, right? Mm-hmm. And that can't happen in a World Series team. Even if your pitching is the most dominant pitching, you have to have some stars on that offense in order to carry you.
So I want to ask you a little bit about your perspective and what you experienced as a player when an offensive group would go through a prolonged struggle like this. Now, maybe you were never on a team that had it this tough, where really beginning to end, they had issues all year putting the bat on the ball. But when an entire lineup doesn't hit like this, obviously when they get asked about it, they're going to tell the media publicly, hey, we're going to work through it. We're always trying to work at it one day at a time, et cetera, et cetera. But when you're behind those closed doors and you're in that clubhouse, how is it being perceived? Like, are the pitchers starting to get a little antsy? Are they starting to get a little on edge? Or are they is it I guess the best way I can just ask it is how does it rub off on everybody in the clubhouse?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two parts. So I was on one team that wasn't very good offensively in my career, and that was in 2016 with the Rays, and we just struggled. And I think the caveat to that was we were 20 games out of it in August, right? Mm-hmm. So it's usually when you have these kind of massive struggles offensively, your team is nowhere near being in it. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the opposite for these guys, right? They had massive struggles, but they're in it. So they needed to find answers. When you're on a team that kind of struggles offensively and you're way out of it, they're just going to go replace you and find guys that can kind of, who's going to be a part of the future? Well, they didn't have that luxury this year. They needed answers immediately. And, back to the question is I think there's this unspoken rule in the clubhouse where it's you just don't talk about the pitching and the pitchers don't talk about the hitting because we both know how equally hard they are and we could never do the pitching. That being said, what a load for a pitching staff to carry all year long, to the point where we saw in August they faltered a little bit because you just can't do it. You can't expect guys to go out every single day for 6 months and dominate the way they have. I mean, it's just this pitching staff has been historically great, and they've also been very gracious to the offense in their interviews at every moment, right? Saying hey, these guys are working hard. We know hitting is hard. And just gone about and handled their business the way they should. And so I think not only performance-wise have they done unbelievable, but the way they've handled it, I think, inside the clubhouse has been top tier.
So you played for one of the more numbers-driven organizations there is in the Rays, and they have their processes of how they go about getting good hitters and good pitchers. And that requires the hitters to sort of buy into the process of the team for what they deem to be productive. But, we've heard a lot this season that you can only buy into the process so much, and there's a responsibility of hitters as well to, go in there and be themselves, because if you only sit there and think about what the team preaches the whole time, it's going to be hard to compete in the batter's box. How do you remember balancing that for your career?
No, that's a great question. I think early on I struggled, right? Because you don't have a good feel for that. And you don't really know how to hit at the big league level, because hitting at the big league level is just so different than the minor leagues and anything you've ever done. So you're trying to figure that out. That's kind of the wrestling match you have in the first probably 3 years of your career. It's how do I balance, I know what I'm really good at and what I've been really good at with, and I need to kind of figure out how to play this big league game of how they're attacking me and what they're trying to get me to do. Because, in today's big league game, and when I was playing, especially towards the back half of my career, it became a game of like, I'm going to get you to chase, right? I want you to swing at my pitch that looks like a strike and then ends up like a ball. Well, if that ends up being your strength that looks like a strike, you're going to want to attack, right? And then you're susceptible to being behind in count. So, in Tampa, at the time, they were kind of more evolved in pitching and then coming along and hitting. And my hitting coach there, Chad Matola, I thought was really good. He was like, hey, listen, it doesn't matter what you're going to do up there. It just has to be one direct positive thought, right? So do that and run with it the whole AB, the whole day. And we can talk about in between adjustments of the at-bats, right? And so the confidence of like, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do. And whether or not I get it, I felt great about that. And then I went to the Dodgers. And when I went to the Dodgers, it reshaped the way that I thought about hitting, in the sense of they wanted you to dictate where you were going to get out, right? So, for example, if a guy's got a really good fastball, four-seam fastball, and a good splitter, right? The splitter is probably his chase pitch, and most of that chase is going to be down. Well, if I want to give myself a chance in the at-bat, I'm gonna take a shot at missing his four-seamer at the top of the zone, because there's not as much miss on that, right? And so it became this, like, I have a better chance, even though maybe my strength is down in the zone, I have a better chance here because the rest of the league is chasing down. That splitter's too good to try and beat him down there. So I'm going to raise my sights a little bit, and I'll swing and miss at a couple of top of the zone, because that way, if he throws me those splitters, maybe I can get into a leverage count where I get a good pitch to hit, and then the at-bat is mine, right? So it becomes this idea of dictating the at-bat, having the at-bat on my terms in the way that I want to get out. And look, sometimes you go back to the dugout and you're 0 for 4 with 4 Ks, because that's how good big league pitchers are. I found those instances more rare than, hey, I'm sticking to this plan and executing it. But it's on the guys to, the organization can give you that information. It's on the players to come together and say, this is the way we're going to do things. And ultimately, it comes to the individual of, I'm committed to that in my at-bat. And if you're not, and you want to do your own thing, well, you better be successful at that, right? Because it's a game of results. So if you're saying, hey, that doesn't work for me, and I have to think this way, and you're hitting 205 or 175 or whatever it is with a 600 OPS, well, it doesn't work for you, right? So you have to be able to adapt as a big leaguer and say, okay, this doesn't work for me. That's confusing, but maybe I'll take the time to learn that, because over due time, it will become the way to be successful.
Man, that's super interesting. I guess that speaks volumes to why the Dodgers might be the best organization in baseball, because that whole philosophy is so interesting.
No doubt. No doubt. They, and JT, I thought when they brought over JT, he's got that. I mean, sitting next to him in the dugout was one of my favorite things to do. Like, this guy is such a smart hitter. And I thought when he came over, I thought when Brant Brown came over, that they were going to have this change of philosophy, but, they just didn't see eye to eye with the way Brant Brown did things.
Right. And maybe he didn't have a long enough chance to do it. He was only there a couple months and everything.
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
So yeah. You talk about the individuals and it being on each individual to execute. Is it harder than ever now for teams to put in a team philosophy for hitting? Because every individual has a private swing coach now that's a big leaguer, right? So is it hard for teams to say, hey, do it this way, when every individual different guy has their own way of going about hitting?
Yeah, it's probably harder than ever, right? Like, having individual swing coaches creates such a mess inside. And, I had one. It's actually Robert Van Scoyoc was my individual hitting coach before he became the big league hitting coach for the Dodgers, and he was incredible at what he did. And most of those guys, if not all of those guys, are mechanical driven, right? So here's the foundation of the way we teach the swing, and whether it's teacher man and sitting your backside and flipping the barrel back, or it's Robert and trying to get through and stay linear with the ball. Everybody's got their own ideologies of hitting. I think that's actually okay to have that, right? Like, we look through the history of baseball, and there's so many different swings. So whatever works for you is totally fine. Now, once that happens and you have your own hitting coach, unless you played in the big leagues, you don't know what it's like to step in the box and like have an approach and put it together. And that's where I feel like LA is far above a lot of these teams. And even Baltimore is really good at this now. But if you get a team to buy into an entire approach and say, hey, look, this guy is really good at this. And unless we stick together on this, we're not going to be successful tonight. I think of this game where we had against Kevin Goff when we were playing the Giants, right? And this guy was lights out in San Francisco. Like, he was impossible to beat. No one could see the splitter. It looked exactly the same, and he threw it right in the bottom corner. And we faced him a couple times during the year, and he just tore us up. And so we finally came together in the third time we faced him and was like, hey, listen, we need to make an adjustment. We think we have this tip on him, right? And it's like 80% right? So some guys are going to look stupid up there, right? You're going to guess wrong, but it's about passing the baton. And we bought into it as a team, and we just laid off splitters, laid them off. We saw the tip some of the times. Sometimes we chased him. He got so frustrated out there as a pitcher that he started making up a different changeup. Like, he started throwing this other changeup that he had earlier in his career and throwing a slider. And that wouldn't have happened unless we committed together. And I think that's really difficult to do unless you have good leadership and guys that have done it and been successful and able to speak from a place of confidence. And that's where the Mariners are kind of lacking. Like, they don't have anybody that's been successful like that to be able to share with the younger players. Carlos Santana, I thought, was the best sign that they got a couple of years ago and turned the whole season around. Because if you guys remember, you go back, they were going downhill and Service was on the hot seat as well then. And they bring in these guys that know how to, like, share this information. And lo and behold, youngsters take it and they run with it.
So I actually have a really interesting question for you based off a veteran coming in and kind of changing things a bit. When did you start to take on this veteran presence of, let me share my knowledge with younger players while also understanding everybody's competing for a job? In the sense of, like, I remember this story came out about you in spring training when you were with the Mariners and you were talking to Jared Kelenic. It was his first spring after being in the big leagues. And you're talking to him in the dugout and you're like, you're pretty late on when you're loading up and trying to time up the pitcher, right? And he had no idea. So I guess, like, when did you start to take on that sort of role and understand that you have knowledge to give other people?
Yeah, I think, early on, you're just trying to figure it out. And so you're trying to find anybody that has an idea, right? And then, I got to Arizona probably about my, fifth year, and there was guys there that were really smart. And Paul Goldschmidt, AJ Pollock. I tried to hang around Goldie as much as I could and then watch the way that he would talk to younger players. And then, went to Chicago and saw Anthony Rizzo. So I didn't need to do this in different places. And then being able to come to Seattle and even in LA a little bit with the youngsters that came up, it was, this game is really difficult. And I think when you, in any place of life, when you come across somebody that's kind of experienced something similar to you, you immediately have this kindred spirit where it's like, hey, let's sit down and talk, right? And with Kelenic, it was like the talent was otherworldly, right? And being able to see things, because I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted to do at the dish, right? Like there ends up being this combination of stuff, whether it's sink or splitter, curveball, left-hander, like you can kind of group approaches together once you get a good grasp of the big leagues of how I'm going to do that. Now, there's always adjustments mid-game and mid-at-bat, but once you kind of get an understanding of what each at-bat is going to call, you can then in turn shift your focus a little bit to young guys that like have no idea, right? And be able to prepare them in a way like, hey, why don't you start thinking about things like this? The ironic thing about that is in spring training that happened and Kelenic loved it. And I talked to a bunch of guys. And then there was a moment throughout when I went down to AAA for a little bit where I was sharing information with all those guys and loved doing it, loved being down there and helping those kids. And I won't say his name, but I had a front office member in the game in Vegas, and I was sharing with Marcus Wilson about how to hit a cutter, right? And a cutter is a very, very specific pitch in which you hit in that the farther it gets away from you, especially if it's got some ride, like you're going to swing underneath it and you're going to be out. That's why Kenley Jansen was so good for so long. Mm-hmm. And I told him, hey, why don't you try and get it a little bit closer? And, hits a double and comes back. He's like, so you really try to do a cutter like that? I'm like, yeah, man. Like when you got guys that throw it hard, like you don't have time to kind of fillet it the other way. And the front office member there was like, hey, I don't want you sharing this kind of information with guys. It's a very unique approach. And I, respectfully, I didn't. I said, hey, that's fine. And I talked to somebody later and I just said, it's interesting that I've been in that box now for 10 years. And I've had success against the cutter. And this kid is coming to me asking for help, and I help him, and yet you don't want to be able to talk to that. I've never in my life, eight organizations that I played for, all of them great, but never have I ever seen an organization say something like that.
Well, that's interesting, certainly. And my next question is based off of, I would say, the experience of being in the box versus someone who didn't have as much experience in the box. Hearing it a little bit over the last week and change with the Mariners making the coaching change with Scott Service and the hitting coach with Jerry Dipoto out, and Edgar Martinez now inside too. As a player, it's not that Jerry Dipoto doesn't know baseball. He's obviously very smart. You don't get hired as a major league hitting coach without being very smart and knowing your stuff. But what is the difference when it comes out of Edgar Martinez's mouth instead of Jerry Tohart's?
Yeah, there's instant credibility, right? Like, this guy's done it, been successful. I think you can go too far, right, and say, like, hey, if you played, you're automatically a good hitting coach. Like, that's not true. I've been around plenty of guys that have no idea what they did, and they explain it the way they did it, and that's all they know how, right? So it's not just that you played in the big leagues. It's that some guys that played in the big leagues, they're very good at communicating how to have a good approach, how to have a good swing. They've kind of taken in the information from the guys that they played with in conversations and been able to try and fail a little bit. Because I do agree with you. Being with Jared, I thought JD was very smart. Like, I thought he knew the swing, and he actually knew how to, like, develop a game plan with some of the best guys in the league. It's just he didn't have the, the wherewithal sometimes to say it. And so having Edgar, as soon as he sits there and he says something, he's able to get respect right away.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a little bit about you and your connection to Edgar, because obviously you grew up around here. You grew up a Mariners fan. And I remember this story coming out about you when Edgar was trying to make his final push into the Hall of Fame. And you told some of the media in Tampa Bay, you're like, listen, respectfully, I'm like, you guys are kind of on my you-know-what list, because did I see you didn't vote Edgar into the Hall of Fame? Like, what went into you doing that?
Man, I just love that guy, man. Like, watching him as a kid, I have a picture I just saw at my mom's the other day of when I was like 9 years old, of mimicking his stance, right? And I watched him so much. And I think, Seattle not being in the World Series or in a major market and talking about how good he was, you may have missed how good Edgar was. And being in Seattle and being able to see him every day, watching him play, and how dominant he was, how clutch he was at the DH position, I think we just got a little bit lost in there, And it was, some of it was playful banter with Mark Tompkin and his vote and whatnot. But I just knew that this guy was a generational hitter. He had such a unique story of not really taking off until he was older in the big leagues, and then running with this dominant average, slugging, all these different numbers. I'm like, we got to really take a look at who we're putting in the Hall of Fame, because this guy deserves every bit of it.
So what's crazy about that is most people just rip you apart for even saying something like this, but there's a legit argument to be made. Edgar was a better career DH than Big Papi was. Like, you put the numbers next to each other, there's a lot of categories that Edgar outs Papi in. The difference is Edgar didn't play in a big market like Boston, and he didn't get as many postseason opportunities as Papi, so he wasn't on the big stage.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, if you flip-flop that and you put Edgar in the same situations that Big Papi was in the playoffs, and I bet you Edgar's just as clutch with some of the biggest homers or biggest hits that we've ever seen. He just, he didn't get the luxury of, like you're saying, playing in the playoffs and some of the best teams that they had. And so not being in that major market on the East Coast where you're able to see, Big Papi every single day has definitely a distinct difference in opinion on a player. And so I was just trying to be a voice for a guy that he's got a very soft voice in Edgar.
Well, you did your part. I mean, your little part, he got in, right? It took him 10 years, but he got in.
I'd like to think that I did, but I think he did it himself. I think they all just came to the realization of, you know what, we're missing this guy.
Did Mark ever end up voting for him, Mark Tompkin, after that?
You know what? I think that spring training I came, and Mark is a very interesting media guy. He's very opinionated, but he will sit there and he'll like, hey, and I think he did this to me in spring training. He's like, you know what? You actually made some really good points, and it made me sit back and go look at my my vote. I can't remember if he switched it or not, but I do remember he had the humility to say, like, hey, there's actually some valid points there, to be able to go look back. So, hey, maybe that vote is what turned it.
There you go.
Want to ask you a little bit about your come up through the minors. I mean, you have a really awesome story about turning around your baseball career in the minors. But first, since we just talked about 25 minutes worth of baseball, I want to switch sports for a second because you were a legit football recruit in high school and then after 3 years of the minor leagues. So I want to ask you, can we get a player comp of what you were like as a football player?
Man, the guys are too physical and athletic today. I got nothing. The guy that I loved watching growing up, who I would say was Christian McCaffrey's dad, was Ed McCaffrey. Like, that guy was a stud on the Broncos. And I remember just watching him over and over again, like, that's exactly who I want to be when I grow up if I was going to be a football player. So, football is such a different mentality than baseball. Probably fits more in line with my personality. And I absolutely loved every minute of it.
So you were a Washington State recruit coming out of high school. You had an offer to play baseball and football there when you graduated in 2007.
That's right.
And you go to the minor leagues for 3 years, and you have the situation where you were struggling. You thought about quitting baseball. You put some feelers out there for college football teams to think if that was still an option for you. So could you walk us through, first of all, which teams you talked to, what your thought process was there, and then ultimately the decision to come back and play baseball again?
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. Like, I was just so bad for 3 years, and I guess I wasn't bad. I was very inconsistent, and the struggle in the minor leagues was just like, what the heck am I doing? And so before I got too old, I was like, man, do I need to go do something else before I run out of time? And I came home after I kind of had called the farm director and said, hey, I'm done with baseball. And as you're sitting there, you're trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do next? And I sent out an email, found all the emails for the Pac-12 coaches around the league and got them out, Oregon State, all of them. And the first one to get back to me was Steve Sarkisian, who was at UW. And I said, I prefaced all these emails with like, hey, I don't need a scholarship. I have that already in my contract that they'll pay for it. So I don't need any scholarship. I just need an opportunity to come walk on. And if you'll actually legitimately let me play. And Sarkisian was like, I don't see a downside to this. Why don't we have you out to practice next week, and we'll go from there. And, when that email came in, I was like, oh, this is a reality. Like, I have to actually put on the pads and go in front of everyone and, memorize a playbook again and do all that. And not only that, I'm thinking like, man, I'm going to be 5 years older than some of these kids that are coming, and this is going to be strange. So, I think deep down in my heart, I knew I wasn't really done with baseball. I was just trying to, see what else was out there per se and really kind of test, like, do I really want to go back? And after I got that email, I contemplated, and I was really close to saying I'll be there. But, I had some friends step in and say, hey, I think you still got some life to live in this baseball game, and went back, and the rest is history.
So you weren't ready to get hit again.
You know what? And I don't think that there was targeting just yet, right? And especially right out of high school, there was no targeting. What a scary game. There was guys like, I had Taylor Mays. I don't know if you guys remember the name.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This guy was a monster at USC. And on my visit to WSU, that's who they were playing, was USC, with Clay Matthews and Brian Cushing, Ray Maluga, Taylor Mays, Lawrence Williams, all these guys. And I watched, I forget who was coming across the middle, but Taylor Mays comes and just levels this guy. And it took him a second to get up, and then they kind of like ushered him off the field. And I remember turning to my dad, is like, I don't know if I'm ready to take that hit just yet, And so when I fast forward with Sarkisian, I that was definitely a hesitation of mine. Like, I'm just not sure I want to take one to my head with how big some of these guys are.
So when you were at that low point of your baseball career, can you even put into words like the whole "this was all worth it" thought and feeling to just a couple years later when you make the catch on Jordan Zimmerman's no-hitter?
Yeah, it was crazy, fellas. Like, coming back, I never had the expectations of like I was going to make it to the big leagues. Like, I had struggled for 4 years. I had no validation for thinking that, right? And so I just knew I didn't want to end my terms on that, right? It was like, I'm going to go back. I'm going to try and change the perception of me and the way that I've kind of acted these last 4 years. And it went really fast, and the success came really fast. And getting to the big leagues, and I think, a little bit less than 2 years at that point, to catching Jordan Zimmerman's no-hitter, it was like a whirlwind, Like it wasn't until I got home after we went to the playoffs that year with Washington was like, man, that low point to this, it was definitely all worth it, to be able to just hang in there. And that's a part of the reason why I like, at the end of my career, I liked pouring into guys like Kelnick and Cal and, Donovan Walton, where it's just like, hey, look, as bad as it can get, which it was for Kelnick and a little bit for Cal early on in his career, it's like, as bad as it can get, just hang in there, fellas. Like, keep grinding and fighting, because you just never know when it's going to click. And if you give up too soon like that, you may be running away from a dream that you don't even know what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
Did you black out on that catch? You remember much of it?
Yeah, I was scared out of my mind being in left field because I was a shortstop and a third baseman coming up. And so this was only like 2 years of the outfield. Didn't play outfield as a kid, never. Was always the shortstop. And so to be a quote-unquote defensive replacement at the end of a game when somebody's got a no-hitter, I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I just don't want to get booed out of this city and never be able to show my face around this town. And so I remember that ball being hit and just putting my head down, and Jason Worth earlier in that year in spring training, who had taken me under his wing, had told me, hey, when you're out here in the outfield, put your head down and run to a spot every day for the rest of the year in BP. And I did that. And that was the one moment when it was like I actually had to put my head down for almost the entire time, or I would have had no chance of catching that ball. But I honestly don't know how I got from where I was to where the ball was that fast. I mean, I don't know what happened to me. And then catching the ball and I can still hear today the elation of 50,000 people at Nats Park going crazy, which is probably one of the top 5 coolest moments in my career.
I can imagine. What else is up there with it, if you could rank a couple of them?
Yeah, there was a game against Toronto when I went 4 for 4 with 2 doubles and a homer and 4 RBIs, and I think we ended up winning 4-3, something like that. And I hit a 3-run homer in the 8th to win it. That was pretty great. I think, being on the field for Scherzer's 3,000 strikeout, 2,000 strikeout, that was pretty cool to be a part of that. Getting to the NLCS, fellas, is incredible, and being able to be a part of that run with the Dodgers and being on that team is up there. And then there's nothing like hitting a walk-off homer in the big leagues. Running around the bases with the crowd going nuts and you're sending them home and jumping on home plate with your boys. Those are probably all in the top 5.
What was it like getting to watch postseason Bryce Harper up close and personal?
Dude, this guy's just got a flair for the moment. Like, it just is never bigger than him. I think early on, Bryce was trying to figure out his identity. Like, deep down, he knew who he was, but he was trying to figure out how to wrestle with it, with how the league was taking it. Because if you guys remember, like, the league didn't really accept Bryce very easily. Mm-hmm. And I loved Bryce. Like, I came up with him. He was with me in instructs as a 17-year-old. And, he obviously flew faster than I did through the minors, but we played in the big leagues together. And I always, really appreciated Bryce. I thought he was an unbelievably hard worker. And as long as he would go to battle every single day, that guy can be on my team every time. Like, does he love the spotlight? Absolutely. But does he deserve it? Absolutely. Right? Right. Being around him in the playoffs that year in 2014 is kind of what set him up for the rest of his career when he homered twice off of Hunter Strickland in big moments. And I knew I remember sitting next to Adam LaRoche on the bench and thinking, man, this is a different player. Like, you could see the calmness in the box. And then he kind of parlayed that next year into his first MVP. And, man, he hit the ground running. But that guy's an absolute stud.
What was he, 21 that year?
Yeah. Yeah, he was younger. 21 or 20. Yeah, 21 or 22, somewhere in there. But, yeah, he was, a couple years younger than me. And he'd already had, 2 All-Stars and trying to figure out his way in the league. I'm like, this guy just a next world talent. I mean, I was lucky enough to be in 2 of the most generational first pick overalls in Strasburg and Harper, and the Nats got them both. And it was these guys are just built different than the rest of the world, and watching them go out every day and just dominate the rest of the league was, man, what a blessing to watch that.
The last question I have for you, Steven, is now that you're done playing baseball, you're spending some time coaching, you're spending some time doing media stuff. Did you have a sense that once you were done playing, you wanted to stick around baseball? And did you have a sense that you wanted to do some media stuff?
Not really on the media stuff. Towards the end of my career, it was more people kind of saying like, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this, and you should give it a try." Because I love the game. Like, I love talking about the game, as you guys can probably tell. Like, I could sit here, we could do this for probably 4 hours, and we could figure out a bunch of different things to talk about in the game. And on top of that, I love helping people, right, and serving people. And so I did think that there was going to be a capacity to be in the game, whether that be coaching or get involved in the front office or something like that. And I still think that's a very real possibility that I'll pursue when the time is right. But this game is so awesome, man. And the journey it takes you on, whether you succeed or you fail, and the things you learn about yourself, and being able to kind of uprise a whole city and a community. There's just nothing like it, and the ups and downs. And that's what kills me about this year for Mariners fans is, I really want these guys to be successful. I want Mariners fans to experience that World Series and get that championship, because at the end of the day, man, I think the city, like we saw with the Seahawks, how it turned into kind of a football town, I think it would be just as much a baseball town if we saw them win a World Series.
Yeah, the place would burn down.
No doubt.
Legitimately.
No doubt.
Steven, this has been awesome. We really appreciate you taking some time to join us here today. Hopefully we get a chance to catch up in person sometime. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Fellas, thanks for having me on anytime.
Hope you guys learned a lot from that conversation with Steven Souza Jr. Before we wrap it up, let's hear a word from Game Time. Less than a month left in the baseball season. If you're looking to get out to the park one last time, let Game Time help you get there with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Lots of exciting events over the next week for you to choose from. The Mariners get back in town on Tuesday against the Padres. You can get tickets for as little as $15. It's also week 1 of the NFL season, and you can snag seats to Seahawks Broncos at Lumen Field for $110. Get a panoramic view of your seat and toggle the all-in pricing feature so you know how much you're paying and what the view is before you buy. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code JUSTBASEBALL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code JUSTBASEBALL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Well, that'll just about do it for this episode of the Marine Layer Podcast. You guys know the drill. You want to listen to the full form podcast. If you're listening, make sure to download, make sure to rate and review 5 stars. If you're watching, hit that subscribe button. That really is the best thing you can do to support us, support the channel, everything. Make sure to like the video, drop a comment, all that good stuff, and leave us a follow on social media too. That's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube Shorts, @Marine Layer Pod. That's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.